She was left to die by alien doctors. The humans' unexpected rescue stunned everyone. The medical bay was quiet, too quiet. Only the faint hum of the machines and the soft hiss of oxygen filled the air. The walls were smooth metal, glowing faintly under the dim blue lights. It was cold here, almost like the room wanted whoever was inside to feel unwelcome. On the bed lay Leora, her skin pale blue, her breathing shallow, her eyes were half closed, and every rise and fall of her chest looked like a battle. She had been brought in 3 hours ago after collapsing in the streets of the alien capital. 2 alien doctors had examined her, speaking in their own fast language. They had checked the monitor, whispered to each other, and then they had simply walked away. She is not worth the resources. One of them had said before leaving. They had turned off some of the machines, leaving only the dim light above her. The door had shut with a hiss, and the sound of their footsteps faded into silence. Now, she was alone, her lips moving slightly, as if she wanted to say something but didn't have the strength. In the corridor outside, a human named Jack was repairing an air vent. He was an engineer, wearing a tool belt and a worn jacket. The station was large and full of people, but humans were rare here. Jack was one of the few allowed because he could fix things that alien machines couldn't. He didn't care much for politics or alien rules. He just wanted to do his job and keep his head down. But today, something felt wrong. From the vent panel he was working on, he could see the faint blue light coming from the clinic. He heard voices earlier, and now it was silent. Curiosity tugged at him, and against his better judgment, he walked closer, through the narrow glass panel, in the clinic door. He saw her. She looked so small on the metal bed, barely moving. Her breathing was slow, and her hands hung limply at her sides. Jack frowned, knocking lightly on the door, but there was no response. The door wasn't locked, so he stepped inside. The cold hit him first, then the smell, clean but lifeless, like metal and chemicals. Jack walked to the bed and looked at her. Her eyes fluttered open for a second, and in a faint whisper, she said, "Please, don't leave me." Her voice was weak, but it went straight into Jack's chest like a knife. He glanced at the machines. They were off. The screen's dark. In the corner, a chart hung from a clip, alien symbols covering the page. Jack tapped. His command used a translation app. The words appeared in human language. Condition terminal. Treatment not advised. Resource waste. He stared at the words, feeling anger rise in him. She wasn't dead yet, but they had already given up on her. He reached into his tool belt and pulled out a small human med scanner. The green light scanned over her body, showing vitals that were low but not hopeless. He recognized the signs: dehydration, organ stress, infection, all things that could be treated. "You're not dying today," he muttered. But then the reality hit him. He wasn't supposed to treat alien citizens, especially ones marked as non-essential. If he interfered, it would be a violation of station law, and violations here didn't mean fines, they meant prison. Maybe even worse. Leora's lips moved again. "They don't care." "I'm not." One of them. Her words were broken, but Jack understood. Her skin color and facial features were slightly different from the aliens he had seen. Something about her looked familiar. It clicked in his mind. She wasn't fully alien. She was a hybrid, part human, part alien, and in this place. That was worse than being a stranger. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Jack's heart started beating faster, through the glass. He saw 2 alien guards walking toward the clinic. He knew what that meant. They were coming to take her away. She would disappear from the station records, and no one would ever see her again. He looked down at her, her hand barely lifting to touch his arm. Her eyes begged him, without words. Jack's breath came faster, his mind racing. He could walk away now, and no one would blame him. But he knew that if he left, she would be dead within the hour. The guards' shadows fell across the clinic door. Jack clenched his jaw, made his choice, and reached for her. lifting her carefully into his arms. He felt how light she was. To light, the monitors beeped weakly as he moved. The door hissed open behind him, and one guard shouted, but Jack didn't stop. He turned and ran straight into the maintenance tunnels, alarms starting to blare across the station. Leora's head rested weakly against his shoulder, her breathing shallow, somewhere deep inside her chest. She whispered one word, almost too soft to hear, "Why?" Jack didn't answer yet, but his grip tightened, his boots hitting the metal floor faster. He had just broken every rule that kept him safe, and there was no going back now. Jack's boots pounded against the narrow steel floor of the maintenance tunnels, the dim yellow lights flickering as he ran, the weight of the alien girl in his arms feeling lighter than it should have. Too light for someone her size. Her breathing was shallow and uneven, every sound from her chest like a warning that time was running out. Behind him, the echo of shouts and metal boots grew louder, alien voices barking orders, the alarm sirens howling across the station. Jack's mind raced. He had no plan, no safe place, no idea what the aliens would do if they caught him, but he knew exactly what they would do to her. He'd seen it before. He turned sharply, ducking under low-hanging pipes, steam hissing in bursts around him. The tunnels twisted like a maze, and every turn brought him closer to the forgotten parts of the station, the places no one cleaned or patrolled anymore. She stirred weakly in his arms, her voice barely more than breath. "You can't help me." "Shut up," he muttered without thinking, but his tone wasn't harsh, it was desperate. She tried to speak again, but the effort sent her into a coughing fit. Jack cursed under his breath, pulling the human med scanner from his pocket. The green light flickered over her face, reading dangerously low oxygen levels. Infection spread, fever rising. Her eyes closed again, and for a terrifying second, he thought she was gone. "Don't you dare," he growled, giving her shoulder a shake. He knew a supply point wasn't far from here, an old closet in a cargo wing he had worked in months ago. The aliens had long since abandoned it when a water leak damaged the floor. But Jack had hidden things there, human things. The shouts behind him were getting closer, the voices clearer. One guard calling out, "Human, drop the hybrid and stand down." Jack didn't even slow. The air felt hotter now, not from the station, but from the pounding of his own pulse. He reached the supply closet, kicking the rusted door hard enough to break the latch, slipping inside, and setting Leora down on the dusty floor. Her skin was cooler now, too cool, her breaths faint. Jack's hands moved fast, pulling open a crate and digging out a battered human medkit. Inside were vials, bandages, and a small oxygen canister he'd traded 4 months ago. He slipped the mask over her mouth and nose, twisting the valve, the faint hiss of air filling the silence. She breathed in shakily, but it wasn't enough. Jack filled a syringe with a broad-spectrum antibiotic meant for humans, hesitating only a moment before sliding the needle into her arm. Seconds felt like hours. His eyes locked on her face, her lips parting slightly, her chest rising a little steadier, a faint flicker of color returning to her cheeks. But just as relief started to touch him, her eyes rolled back, her body twitching once before. Going limp? No, no, no. Jack pressed 2 fingers against her neck. There was a pulse, but it was weak, too weak. He started compressions, counting under his breath, the sound of boots slamming against the metal outside, getting closer. He could see shadows under the door. A hand twitched, then grasped his wrist suddenly, her eyes opening just enough to meet his. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Jack didn't answer right away, because he wasn't sure himself. Maybe it was because she was part human, maybe because she had no one else, maybe because walking away would make him just as cold as the doctors who left her. The door rattled hard, a voice shouting, "Last warning, human. Step away from the hybrid." Jack glanced around, every muscle in his body tense. He had maybe 10 seconds before they broke through. His eyes went back to her, and he spoke in a low, firm voice, "Because they don't get to decide who lives. and dies. He grabbed her again, ignoring the aching in his arms, and kicked open the back panel of the closet, revealing a maintenance shaft that ran under the cargo wing. Crawling into it with her held close, the sound of the front door smashing open echoing behind him. The shaft was dark and narrow, smelling of oil and dust. The metal warm from the machinery it ran past. Jack's elbows scraped against the sides as he moved, but he didn't care. She shifted against him, her head pressing into his chest, her breathing slow but steady enough for him to keep moving. Somewhere above, heavy machinery rumbled, the sound masking his movement, but he knew the guards wouldn't give up. This wasn't over, not even close, and as he crawled deeper into the dark, he realized he had crossed a line he could never uncross. The line between surviving quietly and fighting for someone else's life. And now, no matter what happened next, there was no turning back. The maintenance shaft spat Jack out into a wide, silent corridor deep in the abandoned cargo sector. The lights here flickered every few seconds, throwing long shadows across the walls. The air was thick with the smell of rust and old fuel. Leora was still in his arms, her head lolling against his shoulder, her breathing soft but steady, each breath sounding like a fragile promise that could break at any moment. Jack didn't waste time. He moved quickly, boots silent on the dust floor. He knew the guards would be scanning for heat signatures, and even in this forgotten part of the station, it was only a matter of time before they found his trail. He needed somewhere colder, somewhere the scanners couldn't easily penetrate. He thought of the old refrigeration bay, shut down years ago after a leak. Dangerous to most, but exactly what he needed now. He ducked through a half-open blast door, stepping into the bay's shadows. The temperature dropped instantly, his breath turning to mist. He knelt and set Leora on an overturned crate, her skin reacting to the cold with a faint shiver. That was good. Shivering meant she still had fight in her. Reaching into his jacket, he pulled out the last of his human energy gel packs, tearing it open with his teeth. He pressed it gently to her lips. "Come on, eat this. It'll help," he said quietly. Her eyes opened a little, focusing on him as if seeing him clearly for the first time. She obeyed weakly, swallowing the bitter paste. There was a sound in the distance, a deep metallic thud, too heavy to be footsteps. Jack froze, his ears straining. It came again, closer this time, like something big was moving in the dark. He grabbed a wrench from the floor, the cold metal biting into his palm. A shadow moved in the far corner, and Jack's gut tightened. From the darkness emerged, not a guard, but a massive maintenance droid, its metal body covered in dust, its head turning slowly toward him, the sensors on its front glowing a faint red. "Unauthorized presence detected," it said in a voice like grinding gears. Jack cursed under his breath. The old cargo sector still had security systems, ones that didn't care if you were human, alien, or dying on a crate. The droids. Heavy arms began to move, tools clicking into place that could just as easily cut steel as flesh. Leora stirred, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't hurt it, I can." "Override." Jack glanced at her, not sure he believed it, but her eyes were steady, despite her weakness. He slid her carefully down onto the crate and stepped back as she reached out with one trembling hand. Her fingertips glowed faintly, a strange light that seemed to hum in the cold air. The droid paused mid-step, its red sensors flickering, a few sparks popping from its joints. "System override." "Accepted," it said, and then it simply powered down, standing still, like a frozen statue. Jack stared at her. "How the hell did you?" But she cut him off, with a faint, tired smile. "Hybrid advantage. Part of me talks to machines," she whispered. Then her head dipped, as if the effort had drained her completely. The moment didn't last. The hiss of a door opening echoed through the bay. Jack turned sharply, spotting the beam of an alien. Searchlight sweeping across the floor. The guards had found them. He scooped her up again, his muscles aching from carrying her this long, and darted behind the hulking maintenance droid. Using it as cover, The searchlight beam swept dangerously. Close, one guard's voice calling out, "He's here. The human's here." Jack knew the refrigeration bay had a waste chute, an ugly, narrow drop that led straight to the water treatment tunnels. If they were lucky, it would still be accessible. If they were unlucky, it would drop them straight into a filtration tank. He didn't have time to think twice. With the sound of boots pounding closer, he sprinted for the back corner, spotting the rusted hatch. It was barely big enough for one person, but Jack kicked it open and dropped inside. Holding Leora tight, the chute tilted sharply down, cold air whipping past them, the roar of machinery growing louder. And then they were sliding fast into the unknown, leaving the shouts of the guards far above. The chute spat them out into black water, so cold it punched the air from Jack's lungs. The impact jolted through his arms as he clung to Leora. Keeping her head above the surface, the current pulled hard, dragging them through a narrow tunnel lined with slimy metal walls. The roar of rushing water echoing all around. Jack kicked hard, the cold burning into his muscles. Leora's body was limp against him, her breathing shallow but still there. He fought to keep her close as the current shoved them into a grated section. Slamming his shoulder painfully against the bars, his teeth clenched, he shoved her up onto a ledge first, hauling himself after her. The air here was thick with damp and the smell of rust. Faint beams of light filtered down through cracks in the ceiling. Jack lay there for a moment, chest heaving, his fingers numb from the icy water. Leora coughed weakly, turning her face toward him. "Why do you keep risking yourself?" she asked, in a voice so faint he almost didn't hear. He didn't answer right away, because the truth was tangled in his chest. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was guilt, maybe it was that she was the first living soul in months who had looked at him as something other than a tool or an outsider, because no one else will. He said finally, his voice low. She closed her eyes, but there was something different in her expression now. Not just pain, trust, fragile and dangerous in this place. Jack checked the tunnel around them, spotting a maintenance hatch halfway up the wall. It was old, the bolts rusted, but it might lead to a safer section of the station. He climbed to it, prying it open with his wrench, the metal shrieking in protest. When it gave way, a faint warm breeze touched his face. A good sign. He went back for Leora, lifting her carefully. But the moment he stepped toward the hatch, the sound of splashing footsteps echoed from the tunnel they'd come through. Jack's stomach dropped. They'd followed even here. A pale beam of light flickered in the darkness, sweeping the water, voices calling out in that clipped alien language. He shoved Leora up through the hatch first, her small hands gripping the edge. He followed, pulling it shut just as the light reached where they'd been standing. On the other side was a dim, narrow service corridor. The air warmer but heavy with the smell of oil and ozone. The floor hummed faintly underfoot, pipes lining the walls and ceiling. Jack set her down against the wall and crouched beside her. "We can't stay here long," he said, checking his scanner. Her vitals were still low, but the infection was slowing. The human antibiotics were working, for now. She tilted her head toward him, her voice rasping. "You're not just running from them. You're running toward something." He didn't answer, because maybe she was right. Maybe part of him had already decided this wasn't just about saving her life. It was about proving something. A deep clang reverberated through the corridor. The lights flickering. Jack tensed. Then realized it wasn't the guards. It was the machinery of the station shifting into night cycle mode, meaning the main corridors would be emptier, giving them a slim window to move. He slid his arms under her again, feeling her weight press against him, the sound of distant boots still too close for comfort. "Hold on," he muttered, stepping into the shadows at the far end of the corridor, where the hum of the station grew louder. What neither of them saw was the flicker of a small red sensor high above, silently tracking their every move. Jack moved quickly through the narrowing corridor, every step measured, every breath controlled, his ears tuned to the faint echoes behind them. Leora's weight pressed into his arms, not heavy, but enough to remind him how fragile she still was. The hum of the station's engines vibrated faintly through the walls, masking some sounds but not enough to hide the danger. He reached a junction where 3 passageways split, all equally dark and unwelcoming. He crouched behind a pipe, cluster adjusting his grip on her. Her eyes opened slightly, catching the dim glint of overhead lights. "You don't know where you're going," she murmured, her voice tired but carrying the ghost of a smirk. Jack didn't deny it. "I know enough," he said, scanning the floor for maintenance markers. Old human habit, not alien. And there, faint yellow paint, almost gone. A mark used decades ago to guide workers to emergency docking bays. It was risky, but if the bay was still functional, they could steal something small enough to slip past the alien cruisers. They moved into the left passage, the air growing cooler again, the walls narrowing until Jack had to turn sideways in. Some spots ahead, the faint glow of a cracked bulkhead panel cast pale light on the floor. Leora shifted in his arms, looking at it. "That's not just damage. It's sabotage," she whispered. Her words made his skin prickle. He slowed, peering closer. The panel wasn't just broken, it was burned from the inside, wires hanging loose, the edges marked with sharp tool cuts. Someone had deliberately disabled this section. Why would they? He started, but stopped when a sound drifted toward them. It wasn't the clanging boots of guards. It was softer, deliberate, like someone dragging metal across the floor. Jack's grip tightened on the wrench in his belt, his instincts screaming. He backed against the wall, keeping Leora shielded. And then a figure emerged from the shadow ahead. It wasn't a soldier, but another human, tall, wearing a heavy coat patched with alien cloth, a long scar running from his cheek to his neck. His eyes flicked to Leora, then back to Jack. "You're carrying trouble," the stranger said in a low, steady voice. Jack didn't answer right away, his mind racing. Another human here could mean help, or it could mean betrayal. "You going to turn us in?" Jack asked carefully. The man tilted his head, studying him. "Depends. What's she worth to you?" Leora's fingers curled faintly against Jack's arm, her gaze fixed on the stranger. "Don't trust him," she whispered, but the man only smiled faintly. "Smart girl," he said, stepping closer. "The bay you're looking for is 2 turns ahead, but the patrol's already on their way there. You want a chance? You'll follow me instead." Jack didn't like it. Every instinct told him not to trust strangers in places like this, but the sound of distant boots returned, louder this time. The decision was ripped from him. "Fine," he muttered. The man turned without another word, leading them into a narrow service tunnel Jack hadn't even noticed. As they followed, Leora's voice was a whisper in his ear. "He's not helping for free. No one here does." Jack knew she was right, but at this point, they didn't have the luxury to pick who saved them. Ahead, the tunnel curved sharply, disappearing into blackness. What waited beyond that bend would decide if they lived through. The next hour, the tunnel beyond the bend was almost pitch black. The only light coming from thin cracks in the walls, where faint glimmers of the station's outer glow leaked through. Jack's boots crunched over debris, bits of old wiring, fragments of broken tools. The air was colder here, carrying the faint metallic temps of vacuum from somewhere nearby. The stranger moved ahead with confidence, his long coat brushing against the narrow walls, never glancing back to check if they followed. Jack's arms ached from carrying Leora this far, but he refused to slow. Her head rested against his chest, her breaths soft but steady, though every so often, she tensed, as if sensing something he couldn't. They came to a sudden stop at a rusted pressure door. The stranger turned and studied them for a moment. "Once I open this, there's no turning back," he said, his voice low but carrying a weight that made Jack's grip tighten around Leora. "We'll be outside the station's official sectors, in a place they pretend doesn't exist." Before Jack could ask, the man turned a wheel on the door, the metal groaning before it swung inward. a wave of stale air washing over them. Beyond was a cavernous space, but not part of the station's polished corridors. This was a forgotten hangar, its walls patched with mismatched plating, shadows crawling across the high ceiling where flickering floodlights struggled to stay lit. Scattered around were small ships, most of them half disassembled, some nothing more than empty shells. And working among them were figures, not guards, not soldiers, but a ragged mix of aliens and humans, all wearing makeshift gear, all pausing to stare as the stranger led Jack inside. The man raised a hand, and the stares shifted away, conversations resuming in low tones. He led them to a small corner where a tarp covered something big. With a sharp pull, he revealed a compact, heavily modified shuttle, its hull scorched, its engines clearly rebuilt more than once, fast enough to outrun patrol scanners, small enough to hide in the junk lanes. He said, "You want out. This is your only chance." Jack eyed the ship, then the man, suspicion etched deep in his features. "What's the price?" The stranger smiled faintly, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. The girl, Leora's fingers clenched weakly on Jack's jacket, her eyes opening wider, despite her exhaustion. "Jack," she whispered, her voice shaking. The stranger's tone stayed calm, almost reasonable. "You can't carry her forever, and where you're going, she'll slow you down. But she's valuable, to the right people, people who'll pay enough to buy you freedom for life." The hangar's noises seemed to fade into silence around them. Jack's jaw tightened, every muscle in his body telling him to refuse. But the man wasn't wrong with her. Every step was slower, every second more dangerous. Without her, he could vanish into the outer lanes and never be found. He met her eyes, saw the flicker of fear there, but also something else, trust. Not the naive kind, but the dangerous kind, the kind you could break only once. Jack took a slow step back, shifting his stance. "Yeah, not happening," he said, his voice quiet but sharp. The stranger's smile didn't fade, but his hand slid slowly toward the side of his coat, where the glint of a concealed weapon caught the flickering light. The tension between them coiled tighter, the air in the hangar suddenly heavier, and then, from somewhere deep in the shadows above, came a sharp metallic clatter. Something, or someone, watching from the rafters, had just made its presence known. The sound from the rafters froze everyone, the sharp clang of metal on metal echoing through the cavernous hangar. Heads turned, conversations died mid-sentence. The flickering lights swayed faintly, as if something massive had disturbed the air. Jack shifted Leora in his arms, his eyes scanning the shadows high above. The stranger didn't flinch, but his hand paused over the hidden weapon, his gaze cutting upward. "They weren't supposed to find this place," he muttered, almost to himself. That single sentence made Jack's gut tighten. Whoever they were, they'd just become a problem bigger than the deal on the table. A faint, rhythmic clicking began, sharp and deliberate, echoing down the steel beams. Then a beam of pale light swept across the hangar from above, revealing a silhouette, tall, insect-like, its limbs long and thin, ending in hooked claws that clung to the metal supports with ease. The light from its helmet reflected cold and glassy. The hangar erupted into motion, some of the ragged workers grabbing weapons, others scattering for cover. The stranger swore under his breath and stepped back toward his ship. "Change of plans," he said. "You get her out now, or none of us are leaving alive." The creature above hissed, the sound mechanical and wet at the same time. Then it leaped, landing on the hangar floor with a shuddering impact, its claws carving gouges in the metal. The nearest worker didn't even have time to scream before it struck, flinging him aside like a doll. Jack didn't wait. He bolted toward the modified shuttle, weaving between crates and abandoned parts. The stranger was already at the cockpit, hitting switches, the ship's engines whining to life. But the creature was fast, far too fast. It bounded after them, its clicking steps closing the distance in seconds. Leora stirred in his arms, her eyes half open, a weak glow forming at her fingertips. "Put me down," she whispered. But Jack shook his head. Not a chance. Her voice hardened, a strength cutting through the weakness. If you don't, none of us get out. The creature lunged, claws raised, and in that instant, Jack made the choice. He set her down, just as the glow in her hands flared blindingly bright, a pulse of strange energy erupting outward, the shockwave knocking the creature back and slamming it into the far wall, metal bending under the force. Jack grabbed her again, her body trembling from the effort, and they stumbled up the shuttle ramp. The stranger slammed the hatch shut and threw the engines into full thrust. The ship roared, lifting from the floor, shaking the hangar as it blasted toward the partially sealed exit. The creature recovered faster than Jack hoped, leaping toward them just as the shuttle shot through the closing blast doors, its claws scraping sparks across the hull before it fell away into darkness. Outside, the black of space swallowed them, the stars stretching as the stranger slammed the controls. Forward. You two just bought yourselves a lot of enemies, he said, without looking back. Jack glanced at Liara, her head resting against his shoulder, her eyes still faintly glowing even as she drifted toward unconsciousness. Yeah, he said, quietly, but at least we're still breathing. And in the silence that followed, the truth settled in. Whatever came next, they'd face it together.